My name is Jim Donnelly. I've been fooling around with this calculator stuff for a while. The interesting thing about having a historical perspective is you discover how big a subject area can possibly be. And so this is my candidate for the greatest mismatch between available presentation time and scope of subject. And so that would be an indescribable fail, according to my wife. First, congratulations to 50 years of this group. We have gone 29 trillion miles around the sun during that time. So what I'm going to talk about is what I mean by portable in my title, and we'll talk about calculator functions briefly, what are called compendia, and some early mechanical calculator calculations. So I want to introduce a portability index for the sake of this paper. Back at HP in the calculator lab, when we were brainstorming what future machines might look like, one of the phrases that got bandied around was unconsciously portable. And so it's a distinction if unconsciously portable was really meant to distinguish against something like a calculator carried on a belt loop. The premise of the phrase is that you always have your wristwatch with you and you never even think about it. Or I guess, as someone mentioned earlier, a cigarette lighter, but those days have changed. So consciously portable, I'm saying cell phone calculator, barely portable, a laptop PC, and of course some of the modern ones are very light. But something like an HP 110, you're getting into a slightly heavier, partly because of the battery. Portability index 2 is luggable, so that would be like the HP Integral or the old K-Pro. Richard.
When I was in the Army, and we're talking about military gear, portable meant that two men could move it.
Yeah. So Richard mentions that portable meant two people could carry it. That's portability index 1 here, which is the HP 5061 cesium frequency standard. Now, having moved that around a few times, I can tell you that's pretty brutal.
You can find online a guy that used one of those as a watch. He had it strapped to his arm. It was clear that he could barely, hold that up with one arm.
Okay, so that was almost deserving of portability index 0, which would be the Babbage difference engine. Now, there may be people here that were at the conference in London where we got a demonstration of the Babbage difference engine.
Yes.
That was a mind-blowing experience, and it led to my writing the little booklet with a simulator of the Babbage engine, and there's a few of them on the prize table back there, with floppy disks, so get your grease monkey out. So portability index 0, Babbage index, Stonehenge, it's there, but apparently not portable. What was interesting to me are, what are people wanting to calculate? And so this little brief list is interested in date calculation that transcend human history, really. So date and time intervals. Notice in this pattern here that time intervals get the least representation because, frankly, the ability to measure time with any degree of precision is fairly recent in human history. So, for instance, the Scottish astronomer James Ferguson made a working watch at the dawn of the 18th century, and it took a while to get refined up to the point of the HP01. But things like crop cycles, eclipses, phases of the moon, these are mega trends that affect human evolution and life. When do you plant your crops, and and when should I harvest them? So I'm going to go backwards in time here, and this is my little survey of the HP calculator functions. And one of the things you'll notice is that in the very early times, it was really the days, minutes, and seconds, hours, minutes, and seconds came in very early, and of course it was the financial calculators that even had a 360, 365 day switch for your financial formulas. Set flag 24 hadn't been invented yet. So in the CX time module, there's the basic functions for what time is it, what's my clock setting, and date and day calculations. Interestingly, it had day of week, so that's a fun calculation. Free42 added to this by putting in the year, month, day function for that date format. So most of you guys will have probably fooled around with some of these functions when you're checking how long it takes your program to run. So last night's presentation by Jeff was really great, and here he mentioned being able to use the HP01 to track progress in flight. I'm sure there's lots of people in this room that could give a complete lecture on how all this works, but sentimental for all of us old timers here. So mechanical watch complications live in a period of time starting in the 16th century and then coming up to what was essentially a huge point of evolution in watch development in 1926 when the automatic watch started to become available. And the number of complications that could be put into a watch is a watchmaker's term for saying what functions does the watch have for calculating date and time intervals. So this list here shows some of the different things that were in there. Jeff mentioned circular slide rule. There was, and Jeff also mentioned the tachymeter and countdown functions that were in quite a few watches. That was the neat thing about that series of pictures that Jeff presented was there's quite a few watches there that I was not familiar with. So modern day complicated watches are really an art form, and it's quite spectacular. George Daniels is one vendor that's putting out some great stuff. Now here I'm showing two of his watches. Portability index is 5 for something that would go on your wrist. Portability index 4, no way it's going to go on your wrist. That's just not going to work. But here they show time, date of week. They show the calendar, leap year, moon phase. It's got a thermometer. It's got a minute repeater. And it's got a higher price tag than my pay grade will suffice.
What's a minute repeater?
Jeff?
No, he said Jeff.
Did we get that on tape?
When you went traveling in the 18th, 19th centuries, you didn't have a light by your bedside.
I'd be done.
So you would buy a minute repeater or a full repeater, and they would have chimes. And if you had a full repeater, it would chime the minutes, the seconds, not the seconds, but the minutes and the hours, and they'd be a different ping. So you'd press the button on the, and it would chime, bong, 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 you got 3. And then it would go ping, 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 you got 5 minutes. So 3 pings would be 15. And then you got a ting, so it's 15 plus 1 is 16. That's a full repeater. So then there's 5 minutes, they took out the, so you're within 5 minutes. And then there's the repeater where you get the hour.
Okay.
And it's because you didn't have a light.
Well done. Thank you, Jeff.
What's the portability index for the one on the right?
4. Okay, I put the portability index under each.
In the hand, it was confusing, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great until you have to go shopping, and then you've got one hand very busy holding onto that watch. I've heard that. It's not a personal experience. So rewinding a little farther back in time, here's a survey of some of the really famous instrument makers in the 17th century. These are listed alphabetically, but it should be pointed out that Charles Whitwell actually was a mentor to some of these other guys. There's an interesting chain of relationships and mentoring here. These guys were interested in everything from surveying to land surveying to astronomical observations and calculations. Interesting thing about Elias Allen is that he probably gets credit for making the first platform, portable platform, that can support multiple apps. And an app in this case, this is a mechanism that, oh, I pushed the wrong button. It's a mechanism that folds open, and here you have a sundial and you have a compass, you have a table of latitudes so that you can make your adjustments based on where you are. And on the back there's a nocturnal, which is a tool you can use to estimate time at night by looking at the position of the stars of the Big Dipper. And here it is all folded up, and you can see it's about 20 or 25 millimeters thick. These are complicated tables for star positions and tides. The nocturnal is used, this is the arm. You line that up with the two stars in the Big Dipper, and it'll give you a rough approximation of what time of night it is. There was a magnetic compass in these. Now, the word tide computer appears here, and it's a mystery to me what that really meant, because anybody that's looked into tide computers understands why they were never portable. There are an enormous number of terms to calculate, and if tide computers interest you at all, one of the things you should look for are some of the United States Naval Observatory tide computers, which would fill a considerable portion of this room. And of course, the difficulty in tidal prediction is that essentially every estuary in the world has a different tide structure. So you really, you are not, you're not set for a full solution, particularly in the 17th century. So going backwards farther in time, the museum in London, the Science Museum in London, acquired under interesting conditions the remnants of a Byzantine sundial calendar that's dated to roughly 650 AD. It's missing some of its parts, but the publications from some of the scholars like Alberunde point out the components of this thing. This has, I keep pushing the wrong button. This has a little ratchet in here to advance a daily calendar, and there's a phase of the moon dial, And you can see on this side, now these are the original artifacts. I'm calling this a portability index of 3, and I'll show you why in a moment. This is a replica that was made by Michael Wright. Now, some of you might know Michael Wright's name because he's a curator at the Science Museum in London, super nice guy. And he built his own interpretation of this thing, and that's just too tempting.
So did Jim.
Right? So, did it survive the trip?
Is that on the price table?
No. This thing is heavy. It has to give you a little tour here, there's a knob down at the bottom that advances the days, and this is a Roman sundial on this side. And then on the other side, there are dials that show the position of the moon in the zodiac and the position of the sun in the zodiac. And so as you advance the calendar, you can see the progression. Now, it's okay for you guys to turn the little knob here and try it out. I encourage you to hold it by the ring, and you'll quickly learn why the portability index is 3. But this thing is less than a week old, so it survived its journey. We'll see if it survives the trip around the room.
Jim, maybe you should have people come
Holy
to
smoke.
it rather than send it. Yeah, let's do that.
No, I'm very comfortable. This is why we have a portability index. So if it survives the trip around the room, that tells me a little bit about how well it's going to hold up.
Is there a whole bunch of gears and mechanisms?
Yeah, there's a bunch of gears inside.
Holy man, I mean, this.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's, I didn't bring a diagram. I will, I had considered that it would be fun to do a disassembly of this thing, but that would be difficult from the podium. So I also discovered that the little knob likes to fall out of its square slot. And
Did you machine that yourself?
yeah, I made this.
Okay.
Another interesting item, there's a lot of literature about this. If you've ever heard of a YouTube channel called ClickSpring, Michael has made one of these with 2 additional calculations in it, which were hypothesized by Michael Wright, and they would show properties of the position of the nodes of the moon's orbit. I chose not to go that extra mile because under the category of walk before you run, I thought I should see if I could get Rev A to work, and it was an interesting process.
Do you know how much that weighs? 3 pounds, 4 pounds?
Yeah, about 3 pounds. The next thing I want to mention here, same portability index but thinner. Astrolabes are a subject for a graduate course in the history of science all by themselves. This buttresses my argument that the scope of my talk exceeds the available time. But this astrolabe was interesting because there are dials here for calculating positions of planets. And the makers of this astrolabe understood the epicyclic explanation for why planets appear to move in retrograde. And so the epicycle components of this are shown here. And if you flip it over, you can see that there's a pin and slot mechanism that permits you to slide the mechanism down to reveal the epicycle location of the planet. It's way beyond my ability to explain in detail. There has been a paper published very recently by a couple of people that made a reproduction of this, and it's heavy reading. So let's go back farther in time, and probably most people here will have heard of the Antikythera mechanism. It was discovered in a shipwreck about 1900, and this has been a subject of interest for me since I was first told about it in 1964 by the astronomer Chandrasekhar. He knew Price, who wrote some of the first research about it. It's basically a geared dual calendar calculator, possibly with a planet position mechanism. The planet side is missing, but there's an idea about all the things that this thing can calculate, and it's an enormous. This thing's an enormous subject. People who are interested in learning more about these are encouraged to email me, and I can share with you a ton of reference information. But the signal to noise ratio is actually pretty good. The thing to take away from this thing is the ambition mathematically of all these different terms. And I can tell you, after spending some quality times inside the x-rays of the machine, there's some general observations. The first observation in Carmen's paper is, do not consider the knob on the right-hand side of the mechanism as an input. There's no way. It has to be an output, a sidereal time output. The input should be the lunar display at the top. Now, the lunar display at the top gets a lot of press, and so I thought it would be fun to share with you a sample of what this looks like. Could you get this out of the envelope? It was well known to people back in the day there, Hipparchus knew that the moon moved. I want it out of the envelope. I want it out of the envelope. Yes, it's very complicated. You take it out of the envelope. There you go. So, thank you. So I built this pin and slot device that handles the lunar anomaly, and the reason, there are several reasons for doing that, but there is nothing more sobering than trying to build an Antikythera mechanism than you can imagine. So mine's in progress, but the reason I want to highlight this is the cleverness of the implementation. This is a 4-gear pin and slot mechanism, which helps illustrate how the moon's moving a little faster when it's closer to the Earth than it appears to be moving when it's farther away.
Oval gears
And
or not?
not oval, it's a pin and slot mechanism. And so I will hand this around also, and what you will see is that the knob underneath this thing turns the lower input gear, and on the other side there is a pin on the lower gear driving the upper gear, which has a slot. And so the axis of rotation for the gear with the pin is off center, and that's what simulates the lunar anomaly. So as you turn this, look at the position of the little arrows that are on here, and you'll see that they'll move apart just slightly and come back together as the orbit goes around. And so it's really freaking brilliant. It's also incredibly subtle, and it's a testament to the knowledge of the properties of the moon's orbit that existed at the time, and and a stunning achievement to put this correction into this device, which has an awful lot of gears in it. So that also is going to circulate around. So going back farther.
Jim, before you go on, is there any reasonably conclusive evidence of which people made it, the Greeks, or I know there's a lot of debate about it, but
Well, there's a lot in the literature. Tony Freeth's publications would be what I would refer to. Alexander Jones's book is really, really good for that. And again, if you email me, I can email you back assorted PDFs and save you a lot of work trying to find them. But one of the things that I want to emphasize about Antikythera mechanism is this thing was in incredibly poor shape. It had had a tough life. It had a lot of damage inside from gear teeth being destroyed by friction internally. Multiple makers with multiple different soldering techniques had worked on it. Multiple people worked on the inscriptions, and so it was a basket case missing half of its components when it was loaded onto the ship. So it's an amazing story. Anyway, back to your regularly scheduled transition through time. There have been some interesting publications recently about calendar data being found in Ice Age paintings, and some of these have been decoded by various researchers to indicate that these guys were actually tracking the lunar calendar and correlating mating cycles of different species and menstrual cycles and all that sort of thing. Now, portable index here is 0, okay? I mean, cave paintings are not as readily accessible as you'd like. But for a portability index of 5 and the winner is a pattern of incisions possibly representing a lunar calendar with an age estimate of about 10,000 years. This was found in Italy, quite by accident, as some of these. Yeah, so so this could arguably be just a tally stick, but the problem is there's a pattern in some of these findings where you keep finding 29 marks. Well, you know, there's your lunar calendar. And so we'll never know without more findings what the full stories of some of these were. But it's interesting to see the common trends in how people were doing these calculations over time.
Would you say that the mental abilities of these creative people for these intricate mechanical mechanisms is better than what today we have in terms?
Well, the question is, are these guys brighter than us? Well, the real fact is, if the Romans hadn't sacked the Greek culture the way they did, we would have been on the moon centuries ago. This is. Oh, now, Jeff, we agreed we weren't going to mention the whiskey component. Any other questions?
We're short on time.
Okay, short on time. Thank you, everybody.
Oh.